While setting up story time at the library, an 8-year-old asked, "Have you ever played the Hunger Games?" I smiled. Like the movie with Katniss Everdeen? No, silly. It's when we see who cries first from being hungry. I never lose anymore, but Millie still does. Her little sister, maybe 5, was sitting in the corner clutching her stomach. "How long do you play this game?" I asked, keeping my voice light. "My record is 3 days." Ava beamed with pride. "Daddy marks it on the fridge chart." Millie only made it 1 day before she cried like a baby. My assistant Jackie shot me a glance. That's when I noticed how Ava's dress hung loose on her frame. "That's impressive," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Do you play this game a lot?" "Every week, sometimes twice if we've been bad. Like when I forgot to clean my room, I had to play for 4 days. 4 days is a really long time without food," I said, watching her stuff crackers in her pockets. "What happens when someone loses?" "They have to wait longer. Daddy says only weak kids need food every day." Millie whimpered from her corner. "My tummy hurts all the time." Ava whipped around. "Shut up, what's wrong with you? You'll lose points. Do you want to wait another week?" My hand stilled on the book I was preparing to read. "That seems like a long time for the game." "Not really. Theo went 9 days once, but then he fainted at school and the nurse got all weird about it. Now he's not allowed to play anymore." She said it with pity for Theo. "Theo's your brother?" "Foster brother. He went to live somewhere else. Daddy said he was too weak for our family." "Ava, when did you eat last?" I asked casually, like we were discussing the weather. She counted on her fingers. "Tuesday. Daddy says I'm getting stronger." It was Saturday. This child hadn't eaten in 4 days and was proud of it. I noticed Millie's hair was thin, patchy in places. Her arms looked like twigs. "And what about breakfast? Or snacks?" I prompted gently. "Oh no, that's cheating. When we play the Hunger Game, it's nothing at all. Not even milk. Water is okay though, Daddy's not mean." The way she said it, like allowing water made him generous, sent ice through my veins. "Well, it's story time, everyone eats," I said firmly, pushing the entire snack tray toward them. "Different rules here." While the other children arrived, I watched Ava carefully portion out food to her sister, whispering, "Eat slow so you don't throw up." My stomach churned. They'd done this before. "Ava," I said quietly during snack time, "does your mommy play the Hunger Game too?" "Sometimes. But she cheats. I caught her eating crackers in the bathroom once. Daddy made her play for a whole week after that. She kept crying and saying she was sorry, but rules are rules." I excused myself to get more supplies and called CPS from my office. "I have 2 children here showing clear signs of systematic starvation," I whispered urgently. "The older one hasn't eaten in 4 days and thinks it's a game." Back in the story room, I sat close to the girls during reading time. Ava leaned against me, and I could feel her ribs through her dress. "Do you play other games at home?" I asked during craft time. "The strong game," Millie piped up. "We stand with our arms up until someone drops them." Ava nodded. "I lasted 2 hours yesterday. Daddy says we're building character." She showed me the underside of her arms. Bruises lined them where blood had pooled. "Sometimes we play the quiet game in the cold shower. If you make noise, you stay longer." I documented everything on my phone while pretending to take pictures of their crafts. When Ava stood up, I noticed her legs were mottled with purple marks. "Those look like they hurt," I said gently. "Only weak kids feel pain," she recited. "Daddy's making us strong for when the world gets hard." Their mother arrived to pick them up, designer purse swinging, looking annoyed. "Come on, girls. We have training this afternoon." I handed Ava an extra bag of snacks for the road. Her eyes went wide. "But I haven't earned food yet." Her mom shot me a look to see if I'd catch on. "Storytime food is free," I said with an innocent smile. "No earning required." As they left, Millie turned back and waved with a smile that broke my heart. 2 hours later, CPS arrived at their house with police backup. The investigation revealed a nightmare. Food charts on the fridge showed Ava once went 82 hours without eating for talking back. But that wasn't the worst part. When they searched the house, they found Theo's room. The foster brother who went to live somewhere else. He hadn't gone anywhere. The forensic team was already there when I arrived, carrying clear plastic bags out of what used to be a kid's bedroom. I stood frozen in the front yard watching them work, my legs feeling like they weren't connected to my body anymore. The detective who'd called me walked over and put his hand on my shoulder. "We need you to come to the station tomorrow to give a detailed statement about everything those girls told you." I nodded but couldn't speak because my throat felt like it was closing up. They kept bringing out more bags, each one labeled with numbers and letters I couldn't make sense of. The house looked so normal from the outside, just another suburban home with a neat lawn and flower boxes under the windows. That night I couldn't sleep at all. I kept hearing Ava's voice in my head, so proud when she said Theo was too weak for their family. I got up at 2 in the morning and started writing down everything I could remember from story time. Every word the girls said, every detail about the games, the bruises, the way Millie clutched her stomach. I filled 12 pages of a legal pad, my hand cramping from writing so fast. I knew these details might be the only way to get justice for Theo and those 2 little girls. The next morning I drove to the police station feeling like I was moving through thick mud. Detective Lars Murdoch met me in the lobby and led me to a small room with a recording device on the table. He pressed record and asked me to start from the beginning. I told him about the Hunger Games, how Ava hadn't eaten in 4 days and was proud of it. I described the bruises under her arms from the strong game, the purple marks on her legs. He stopped me several times to ask for more details. "She said Theo lasted 9 days once before he fainted at the school," I told him. Detective Murdoch's jaw tightened, but he kept taking notes. He told me they'd found journals in the father's desk with detailed records of every punishment session. Pages and pages documenting which child failed which challenge and how long they went without food. Some entries went back 3 years. My phone rang that afternoon while I was trying to eat lunch, but mostly just pushing food around my plate. Caroline Quinn from CPS was calling to update me on the girls. They're in emergency foster placement and getting medical care, she said. Her voice sounded tired and sad. She told me Millie was severely malnourished, her body weight 40% below normal for her age. Both girls had old fractures that never healed right, and scars from punishments I didn't even know about. The doctor said it would take months just to get their bodies healthy again, and who knew how long for their minds. The next day, my supervisor, Sharon Sutton, called me into her office at the library. She closed the door and pulled the blinds shut. "We need to talk about safety protocols," she said. She'd gotten a call from the police warning that the father had connections to extremist groups who might see me as a target for reporting. The library was installing new security cameras that afternoon. We changed all our check-in procedures for children's programs, requiring photo ID and pre-registration. Sharon walked me to my car that night and made sure I got in safely. 2 days later, Detective Murdoch called with news that made my stomach drop. The mother had been caught at the state border with a car full of cash and fake documents. She was trying to run but got pulled over for speeding. They arrested her as an accomplice to murder and child abuse. She kept claiming she was a victim too, that her husband forced her to participate. The detective didn't sound like he believed her. "She watched those kids starve and did nothing," he said. The story hit the local news that weekend, and my phone didn't stop ringing. Parents were calling the library in a panic, asking if their kids were safe at story time. Sharon and I spent all of Monday fielding calls and emails. We held an emergency parent meeting that night to reassure families. "Your vigilance is exactly what protected Ava and Millie," Sharon told them. We explained our mandated reporter training and how we watch for signs of abuse. Some parents thanked me, but others looked at me like I should have known sooner. Caroline Quinn called again on Tuesday, asking for my help with the case file. "I need you to write out a detailed timeline of everything that happened during story time," she said. She explained that my documentation and quick action gave them the evidence to remove the girls immediately. "You probably saved their lives," she said. I spent 3 hours writing out every minute of that Saturday, including exact quotes from what the girls said. I attached the photos I'd taken of their crafts, which also showed the bruises on their arms. 3 days after the discovery, I got a call from someone named Sierra Collins. She introduced herself as the assistant district attorney handling the criminal case. "I need to talk to you about being a witness," she said. She explained the charges they were filing against both parents. 3 counts of murder for Theo and the 2 other foster kids they'd found buried in the backyard. Multiple counts of torture and child abuse. Conspiracy charges. "They're both facing life sentences," she said. She needed me to testify about what I witnessed and what the girls told me. The worst update came a week later when Caroline called again. "Ava keeps asking when the game will be over," she said. The little girl still thought this was all part of her father's training. She wanted to go home and show him how strong she was being by not crying in foster care. The trauma specialist working with her said Ava didn't understand yet that what happened wasn't normal. She thought all kids played these games and she was special for being so good at them. It would take extensive therapy just to help her understand that what her parents did was wrong, that she deserved food and safety and love without having to earn it through pain. Detective Murdoch called me the next morning while I was sorting books at the library, and his voice sounded different, heavier somehow. He told me the forensic team had found something else on the property. 2 more shallow graves near the back fence where the neighbors said they remembered other foster kids who supposedly went to live with relatives. The way he paused before saying the word graves made my hands stop moving on the book cart. He said the neighbors remembered a boy named Isaac who was there 2 years ago and a girl named Alice before that, both foster placements who the father told everyone had been reunited with family members. I sat down hard on my desk chair as he explained they were expanding the investigation to track down every child who had ever lived in that house. The local news ran the father's arrest photo that afternoon, and seeing his face made everything worse because he looked so normal. Just a regular suburban dad in a polo shirt with a slight smile. His lawyer was already on TV claiming this was all a misunderstanding about alternative parenting methods and that any deaths were tragic accidents from children who couldn't handle proper discipline. I watched him stand outside the courthouse steps, telling reporters that his client was a devoted father who believed in preparing children for a harsh world, and that mandated reporters like me had blown everything out of proportion. Caroline called while I was watching to tell me the girls had been placed with an experienced foster family who specialized in severe trauma cases and were having to introduce food slowly because their bodies couldn't handle normal portions after years of starvation. She said Millie had thrown up 3 times trying to eat a regular breakfast, and Ava kept hiding food under her pillow because she didn't believe it would keep coming. The foster mom was weighing their portions and keeping detailed logs of everything they ate to help their stomachs adjust gradually. 2 days later, Sharon told me there was a mandatory meeting at the county office about the case, and when I walked into the conference room, it was packed with social workers and supervisors. The CPS director stood at the front with a thick file explaining that their office had received 3 prior reports about the family over 5 years, all closed as unfounded after home visits. She read from the reports, and each one described concerns about the children looking thin or having bruises, but the parents had explanations that seemed reasonable at the time. Everyone in the room looked sick as she showed us photos from those visits where you could see Theo in the background, alive and smiling but clearly underweight. One caseworker started crying when she realized she had done one of those visits, and believed the father when he said the kids were just naturally small. That same afternoon, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize, and when I answered, a woman introduced herself as the mother's defense attorney. She said her client wanted me to know she was also a victim, and hoped I would provide a statement supporting her claim that she was forced to participate. I told her I couldn't help and hung up immediately, then called Sierra Collins to report the contact. Sierra warned me this was a common tactic, and to document any attempts at contact, but not engage because the mother's lawyer would try to twist anything I said. The following week, I had to attend family court where Dr. Kurt Frey testified about the girl's medical conditions, and I sat in the back taking notes for my own records. He showed x-rays of Millie's bones, explaining she had permanent growth stunting from malnutrition and would likely never reach normal height for her age. Both girls had bone density problems that would require years of calcium supplements and careful monitoring. And Ava had nerve damage in both arms from holding them up for hours during the strong game. He said the damage was consistent with torture techniques, and some of it might be permanent. 2 weeks after the initial arrest, I found a subpoena in my mailbox, requiring me to testify at the preliminary hearing to determine if there was enough evidence for trial. Sierra met with me the next day in her office, going through exactly what questions she would ask and what to expect from the defense. She reminded me to stick to only what I witnessed directly, not what I thought or felt about it, and to speak slowly and clearly for the court reporter. The morning of the hearing, I put on my most professional outfit and drove to the courthouse with shaking hands. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, and when they brought the father in wearing an orange jumpsuit and shackles, I had to focus on my breathing to stay calm. I took the stand and raised my right hand to swear to tell the truth, while he stared at me from the defense table with those same cold eyes. Sierra asked me to describe what happened at story time, and I carefully explained finding the bruises on both girls' arms, documenting everything on my phone and calling CPS immediately. The defense attorney stood up for cross-examination and tried to suggest I had misunderstood normal childhood games and overreacted because I wasn't a parent myself. He asked if I had coached the children to say certain things or led them with my questions, but I firmly explained that Ava had volunteered all the information while proudly describing her Hunger Game record. After 2 days of testimony from multiple witnesses, including the forensic team and medical experts, the judge made her ruling. She found sufficient evidence for trial on all charges, including 3 counts of first-degree murder, after seeing the food charts, the graves, and hearing how systematically these children were tortured. Both parents were ordered held without bail as flight risks and dangers to the community, and the judge specifically noted the father showed no remorse, even when confronted with evidence of dead children. A week later, Caroline called with an update that was somehow both heartbreaking and hopeful about Ava's progress in therapy. She said Ava had finally cried for the first time since being removed from the home when her therapist helped her understand that Theo wasn't coming back, that he hadn't gone to live somewhere else but had died in that house. It was horrible to hear, but the therapist said it was actually progress because Ava was starting to feel real emotions again, instead of the numbness her father had trained into her. 3 days later, Detective Murdoch called me at work to tell me the forensic team had found something else at the house. They discovered small cameras hidden behind air vents in both girls' bedrooms and the basement where the father conducted what he called training sessions. The tech guys recovered hundreds of hours of footage from hard drives hidden in the garage rafters. Murdoch said some of the videos went back 3 years and showed everything from the Hunger Games to kids standing with their arms up for hours, while the father sat in a chair timing them and marking down when they cried or dropped their arms. He said Sierra was reviewing the footage and it would be the strongest evidence at trial, since it showed exactly what happened to those kids without any question. The next morning, my phone rang while I was setting up for story time, and it was some producer from Los Angeles saying he wanted to make a documentary about the case, and could he interview me about finding the girls. I told him no way and hung up, but he called back 2 more times that day until Sharon helped me write a statement saying the library wouldn't participate in any media that might hurt the girls or turn their pain into entertainment. She sent it to all the major news outlets and posted it on the library website so everyone would know where we stood. That same week, 3 different families contacted the library saying they'd noticed weird things about that family over the years, but never knew what to do about it. One mom said she'd seen Ava at the park looking too thin and asked if she was okay, but Ava just said she was playing a game. Another family said their kid came home from a playdate talking about the Hunger Game, and they thought it was just kids being dramatic. The third family lived next door and said they heard crying sometimes, but figured all kids cry and didn't want to be nosy neighbors. Sharon used this as a chance to organize community training sessions at the library about recognizing signs of abuse and how to report concerns without being afraid of being wrong. She brought in experts from CPS and the police department to teach people what to look for, and made it clear that it's better to be wrong than to let a kid suffer. Meanwhile, the mother's lawyer had ordered a full psychological evaluation, which came back showing she had severe PTSD from her own childhood and something called dependent personality disorder that made her unable to stand up to her husband. The report said she'd been abused as a kid too, and basically picked a husband who continued the pattern. Her lawyer tried to use this to get her a separate trial, saying she was a victim too, but the judge said no, because she still chose to starve children and watch them die regardless of her mental health issues. The prosecution argued that lots of people have PTSD and don't murder kids, so it wasn't an excuse. About a week after that, Detective Murdoch discovered something that made everything even worse. While going through the father's computer, they found he was running an online forum for parents who believed in what he called radical resilience training for children. There were over 200 members from all over the country sharing tips on how to make kids stronger through hunger and pain and cold. Some parents posted pictures of their kids' bruises like trophies and talked about how many days their children went without food. The FBI got involved immediately and started tracking down every single member to check on those kids. Murdoch told me they expected to find dozens of abused children across multiple states, all because this guy was spreading his sick ideas online and making other parents think it was good parenting. A month after the girls were removed from the home, Caroline called with an update that made me cry at my desk. She said Millie had just spoken her first full sentence in foster care when her foster mom asked what she wanted for breakfast, and Millie said, "I like eating breakfast every day." The foster mom had been keeping a journal of the girls' progress and sent updates through Caroline, who shared them with me when she could. She said both girls were gaining weight slowly and starting to look less scared all the time, though they still had nightmares and would hide food in their rooms. I had to walk to the bathroom and shut the door, so nobody would see me crying about a little girl being happy about breakfast. The legal stuff kept moving forward, and the father fired his first lawyer, saying the guy wasn't fighting hard enough for his rights. He hired some new lawyer known for defending extremist groups and militias, who immediately filed a bunch of motions claiming the father was persecuted for his religious beliefs and his constitutional right to raise his kids how he wanted. The motions said the government was attacking traditional parenting, and that parents should be free to discipline children without interference. The judge threw out every single motion, saying that murder and torture aren't protected by any constitutional right, and that religious freedom doesn't include killing children. 2 days later, Sharon called me into her office and said the police had warned her that some group supporting the father might show up at the library to protest during story time. Apparently, the new lawyer was trying to drum up support online, talking about parental rights and government overreach. Sharon had already coordinated with the police to have extra patrols during our children's programs and set up a safety plan where we could lock down the children's section if needed. She also arranged for parents to sign kids in and out so we'd know exactly who was in the building. We ended up not having any real problems, just a couple people with signs out front that the police moved along. Sierra kept building her case and called me one afternoon to say she had enough evidence for multiple life sentences between the videos and the bodies and all the documentation. She was particularly focused on getting justice for Theo and the 2 other foster kids they found buried in the backyard, who never even got reported missing because the system lost track of them. She said the father kept detailed notes about each child, including when they died and what killed them, which was usually starvation or injuries from the training. Around the same time, the girls got a guardian ad litem named Allison Cooper, whose job was to represent their interests in court. She came to the library to meet me and get copies of all my documentation from that first day. She was putting together a petition for permanent termination of parental rights, using my initial report and testimony as evidence that both parents posed an ongoing danger to the children, even from prison. 2 months passed before Caroline called with an update that made me grab my desk for support. She told me Ava was eating regular meals now without hiding food in her pockets or under her bed. The foster mom sent daily reports about how Ava still asked permission before taking food from the fridge. She'd stand there waiting for someone to tell her she'd earned it. The foster family kept telling her food was always allowed, but old habits die hard. Caroline said Ava still counted bites sometimes and got anxious if she ate too fast. The next week, I got home from work to find a thick envelope shoved under my door with no return address. Inside was a letter written in tiny, cramped handwriting filled with Bible verses about sparing the rod and spoiling the child. The father had gotten someone on the outside to deliver it, going on for pages about how I'd destroyed his family. He quoted Proverbs and talked about discipline being love and how weak children grow into weak adults. I drove straight to the police station and handed it over to Detective Murdoch, who said they'd track down whoever delivered it. Within days, the father lost his phone and mail privileges after they traced the letter to another inmate's girlfriend. The pretrial motion started the following month, and Kiara warned me some of the evidence would be hard to watch. She wasn't kidding, because when they played the hidden camera footage in the judge's chambers, 2 bailiffs had to leave the room. Sierra told me later that even the defense attorney looked sick watching those videos. The judge watched maybe 20 minutes before ruling they were admissible as evidence. You could see everything on those tapes, kids standing with their arms up for hours until they collapsed. You could see the father marking time on his phone while Theo begged for water. The worst part was how calm the parents looked while their kids suffered right in front of them. A week later, Sierra called to tell me the mother's lawyer wanted to make a deal. The mother would testify against her husband if they'd reduce her sentence from life to 25 years. She claimed she had information about how Theo died that only she knew. Sierra was considering it because the mother's testimony could guarantee a murder conviction. The mother apparently kept her own notes about the punishments and could provide details the cameras didn't catch. Meanwhile, I started going to a support group for mandated reporters who'd been involved in severe abuse cases. The counselor running it said we all carried trauma from what we'd witnessed and reported. There were teachers and nurses and social workers all dealing with nightmares about the kids they'd tried to help. One teacher talked about finding cigarette burns on a student, and another found a kid living in a dog crate. Hearing their stories helped me realize I wasn't alone in feeling haunted by what those girls went through. Caroline called again with updates about the girls' therapy sessions, which happen 3 times a week now. Ava had stopped talking about the Hunger Games with pride and started understanding they were actually torture. But she still struggled with the idea that her father had been wrong because he'd convinced her everything was training. Millie was making faster progress and had started playing with other kids at the school without being afraid. The therapist said Millie might recover more fully because she was younger when it started. Around the same time, Detective Murdoch told me the FBI had shut down the father's online group after finding dozens of families using his methods. They'd found spreadsheets with punishment schedules and starvation charts being shared between parents across the country. 43 kids got removed from homes in 12 different states because of that investigation. Some parents had been starving their kids for weeks using the father's exact system. 3 months after that first Saturday when I'd called CPS, jury selection finally began for the trial. Sierra spent hours questioning potential jurors about whether they could handle hearing about child torture and murder. She had to excuse dozens of people who said they couldn't be impartial after learning kids had been starved to death. Some people broke down crying just during the initial questioning about the charges. The process took 2 weeks because they needed people strong enough to see the evidence but human enough to understand its horror. That's when the mother officially flipped and agreed to testify against her husband for a plea deal. She told prosecutors that Theo had lasted 12 days without food before his organs started shutting down. She described how they'd made him drink salt water to make him throw up when he snuck food. She admitted to holding him down while her husband beat him for crying from hunger. She gave them dates and times and details about how they'd buried him in the backyard at night. She also confirmed the other two bodies were foster kids who'd died the same way. With the trial starting soon, Sierra scheduled me to testify on day 3 and walked me through everything again. She showed me where I'd sit and explained how the defense would try to make me look like an overzealous busybody. She reminded me to stick to exactly what I saw and heard without adding opinions or conclusions. The defense attorney would probably suggest I'd misunderstood innocent games or blown things out of proportion. She told me to stay calm no matter what they said, and just tell the truth about that Saturday morning. The morning of the trial came faster than I expected. I sat in the witness waiting room with my hands folded, watching other people come and go, while Sierra stood in the courtroom laying out what happened to those kids. Through the door, I could hear her voice carrying as she showed the jury those food charts from the fridge. She explained how Ava went 82 hours without eating, and how Theo and 2 other foster kids died from the same torture. The bailiff came to get me after lunch on the 3rd day. Walking into that courtroom felt like stepping into a nightmare where everything was too bright and too quiet. The father sat at the defense table in a gray suit, watching me with empty eyes while I raised my right hand and swore to tell the truth. I settled into the witness chair and looked at Sierra, who gave me a small nod before starting her questions. She asked me to describe that Saturday morning at story time, so I told them everything. How Ava bragged about not eating for 3 days. How Millie sat in the corner holding her stomach. How they talked about the Hunger Games like it was normal. I described finding the bruises under Ava's arms from the strong game and the purple marks on her legs. The jury watched me carefully while I explained how Ava said Theo went 9 days without food before he fainted at the school. Several jurors looked sick when I told them about Millie's patchy hair and stick arms. I kept my voice steady, even though my hands shook as I described Ava teaching her sister to eat slow so she wouldn't throw up. The defense attorney stood up for cross-examination with a fake smile that made my skin crawl. He suggested I misunderstood what the girls said, that maybe they were playing pretend or exaggerating like kids do. I told him Ava counted on her fingers to show me she hadn't eaten since Tuesday and it was Saturday. He asked if I coached them to say things about Hunger Games, if maybe I put ideas in their heads. I explained that Ava volunteered everything while proudly describing her record, that I never suggested anything about starvation or games. He tried to make it sound like I overreacted to normal childhood stories, but I stuck to exactly what I saw and heard. The mother took the stand 2 days later wearing an orange jumpsuit and looking smaller than I remembered. She described how it started with normal punishments like timeouts, but her husband kept pushing for more. She admitted holding Theo down while he was beaten for crying from hunger. She told them about the salt water they made him drink when he snuck food. Her voice broke when she described watching him get weaker over 12 days until his organs shut down. She said she was scared her husband would kill her too if she tried to stop him. The prosecutor asked why she didn't call for help, and she just stared at her hands without answering. Dr. Frey came next with a laptop full of medical files that made the jury gasp. He showed x-rays of old fractures in both girls' arms and ribs that never got treated. He had photos of scars on their backs from belts and switches. He explained how Theo's body would have broken down during those 12 days without food, how his organs would have failed one by one while he suffered. He said Millie had permanent growth damage from years of starvation, and both girls had nerve damage from the punishment games. The judge called a recess after his testimony because one juror started crying. On day 7, they played the videos from the hidden cameras the father installed in the kids' rooms. The judge only allowed certain parts because he said the full footage was too disturbing for court. Even the edited segments made people in the gallery leave the room. You could see Ava standing with her arms up for hours until she collapsed. You could see Millie locked in a closet screaming while the timer on screen showed she'd been there for 6 hours. The worst part was hearing the father's voice calmly explaining that only weak children needed food or comfort. Detective Murdoch testified the next morning with boxes of evidence stacked beside him. He showed the punishment charts with detailed records of which kid failed which challenge and for how long they went without food. He presented the father's journals where he wrote about breaking the children's spirits to make them strong. He described finding the 3 shallow graves in the backyard with the remains of Theo and 2 other foster kids. He kept his voice professional while reading entries about forcing kids to stand in freezing showers or making them hold heavy books over their heads for hours. The defense tried to paint this as alternative parenting, but Murdoch just pointed to the graves and said, "Dead children aren't strong children." The defense called 3 character witnesses who talked about what a good neighbor and church member the father was. They said he helped with community projects and always seemed devoted to his family. But when Sierra cross-examined them, each one admitted they'd never been inside the house or seen how he actually treated the kids. One woman said she thought it was strange the children were so thin, but assumed they had health problems. Another man said the father talked about making kids tough, but he thought it was just strict parenting. None of them knew about the games or the charts or the foster kids who disappeared. The foster mom testified last, describing how the girls were doing after 10 months in her care. She said they still hoarded food in their rooms and had panic attacks during bath time. She described finding Ava doing the strong game by herself because she didn't know how else to deal with stress. She told them about Millie's nightmares where she screamed for Theo and begged not to play anymore. She explained how both girls needed therapy 3 times a week and might never fully trust adults again. She said Ava still sometimes asked if she was being weak when she cried. The foster mom's voice stayed calm, but tears ran down her face while she talked about teaching them that food wasn't a reward and love wasn't supposed to hurt. The next morning, the father stood up from the defense table and walked to the witness stand, even though his lawyer was shaking his head and trying to get him to sit back down. He put his hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth with this calm look on his face like he was about to give a presentation at work. He started talking about how society was getting weaker and kids these days couldn't handle anything hard, and how he was just preparing his children for when everything collapsed. He said the government would fail someday, and only strong people would survive, and weak kids would die anyway, so he was doing them a favor by making them tough now. The jury members kept looking at each other while he explained his training methods like they were totally normal and reasonable. He said Theo failed the program because he wasn't mentally strong enough, and that's just natural selection working the way it's supposed to. One juror put her hand over her mouth when he said that. He kept going about how Ava was his success story, because she could go days without food and never complained, and that made her ready for anything life would throw at her. He said I was part of the problem because I gave the girls food they didn't earn, and that's why America was falling apart. His lawyer kept trying to object to his own client's testimony, but the judge let him keep talking because he was burying himself with every word. When Sierra asked him if he felt bad about Theo dying, he said no, because weak bloodlines need to end for humanity to get stronger. 2 days later, Sierra stood up for closing arguments and walked the jury through everything step by step. She held up the food charts and showed them the entries where kids went days without eating for things like not making their beds perfect or talking too loud. She reminded them about the videos of Ava standing with her arms up until she collapsed, and Millie locked in the closet screaming. She talked about how I called CPS that Saturday, and if I hadn't, both girls would probably be dead now too. She showed pictures of Theo and the 2 other foster kids who died, and asked the jury to imagine their last days slowly starving while begging for food. She pointed at the father and called him exactly what he was, a child killer who tortured kids and felt proud of it. She reminded them that 3 children were dead, and 2 barely survived because of his sick games. The defense lawyer got up next and tried one more time to make this seem like something other than murder. He said the father went too far with discipline, but never meant to actually kill anyone. He asked for manslaughter charges instead, because there wasn't specific intent to cause death, just a parenting philosophy that got out of control. He said the father truly believed he was helping these children, and that belief, even though wrong, meant this wasn't first-degree murder. The jury left to deliberate and we all waited. I sat in the hallway checking my phone every few minutes while Caroline texted me updates from the CPS office. People brought coffee and sandwiches, but nobody really ate much. 3 days went by with the jury asking for evidence to review and clarifications on legal definitions. On the 3rd afternoon, the bailiff came out and said they had a verdict. Everyone rushed back into the courtroom and the air felt heavy while we waited for the jury to file in. The judge asked if they'd reached a verdict, and the foreman stood up with a paper in his shaking hand. Guilty on all counts, including 3 counts of first-degree murder. The father didn't move or react at all, just stared straight ahead like he was somewhere else. The mother started sobbing so loud the judge had to call for order. 2 weeks went by before sentencing, and Sierra asked if I wanted to give a victim impact statement. I spent days writing and rewriting what I wanted to say. When the day came, I stood at the podium with my hands trembling and looked at the judge. I told him about that Saturday at story time and how proud Ava was of not eating for 4 days. I talked about how this case haunted everyone who learned about it, and how those images would never leave my mind. I said Ava and Millie would need therapy and support for the rest of their lives because of what they went through. I asked the judge to think about Theo and the other kids who died alone and hungry and scared. The judge looked at the father for a long time before speaking. He called him a monster who tortured innocent children and tried to dress it up as making them strong. He said the father showed no remorse even after watching videos of dying children begging for food. He said this was the worst child abuse case he'd seen in 30 years on the bench. He sentenced the father to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. The father finally showed some emotion then, his jaw tightening as the reality hit him. The mother got called up next and stood there shaking while the judge talked about her plea deal. He said her cooperation was the only reason she wasn't getting life too. He gave her 25 years with the possibility of parole and 15 if she completed psychological treatment programs. He said she chose her husband over her children and would have to live with that forever. 6 months after that first story time, Caroline called me with an update about the girls. She said they were doing better with their foster family who wanted to adopt them. Both girls were gaining weight steadily and going to the school every day like normal kids. They still had bad days and nightmares, but the good days were getting more common. She said Millie laughed for the first time last week when their foster dad made silly faces at dinner. Ava was learning to be a kid instead of a survivor. Around that time, Sharon called a meeting with all the library staff about creating a new training program. We spent weeks putting together materials about recognizing abuse using everything we learned from this case. We made handouts about warning signs and what questions to ask and when to call CPS. We also started a fund for books and educational materials for kids recovering from trauma. The board approved it right away, and other libraries in the state started asking for our training materials. One afternoon, I got a call from Caroline saying there was a letter for me that came through official channels. It was from Ava, written in careful handwriting on notebook paper. She thanked me for the snacks that day at story time, and said she understood now that she was hungry, and I helped her. She wrote that she knows the games weren't normal, and she and Millie deserve food every day just like other kids. She said her new parents tell her she's brave and strong without having to prove it by not eating. At the bottom, she drew a picture of her and Millie at a table full of food, both of them smiling. 8 months after that terrible Saturday, Caroline called me at the library to tell me the adoption was going through court that week. The foster parents had filed all the paperwork, and both girls wanted to make it official, even picking out new last names together at the kitchen table one night. I couldn't attend since the judge kept it closed to protect the girls' privacy, but Caroline texted me afterwards that both of them actually smiled in the courtroom when the judge signed the papers. She said it was the first real smile she'd seen from either girl since the case started, not the scared kind they used to do when they thought adults wanted them to look happy. The foster mom had brought cupcakes to celebrate, and Millie ate too without asking permission first, which Caroline said showed real progress in feeling safe. Detective Murdoch called me the next week with news that made my hands shake. The FBI had finished their investigation into the father's online group and found 43 children across 12 states living under similar torture disguised as training. Some parents had printed out his exact starvation charts and punishment schedules, following them like instruction manuals for creating strong kids. The agents found kids as young as 3 who hadn't eaten in days, standing in corners with their arms up for hours, taking ice-cold showers as punishment for crying. One family in Idaho had buried their foster son in the backyard just like Theo, using the father's posts about dealing with weak children who couldn't handle the training. Murdoch said they arrested 28 parents and removed all the kids to safety, though some were in such bad shape they went straight to hospitals for feeding tubes and emergency care. The case files from all these families helped prosecutors in other states build stronger cases, and Murdoch said our original case had saved more kids than we'd ever know. About a year after everything started, I got a call from someone at the state capitol about new legislation they were pushing through. They wanted to name it Theo's Law and needed my testimony about how the system had failed him and the other kids who died. I drove 3 hours to the Capitol building and sat in a room full of lawmakers while I explained how homeschooled kids could disappear from oversight, how 3 previous reports about this family got closed without proper investigation. The law would require deeper investigation of any abuse reports involving homeschooled children, mandatory home visits instead of just phone calls and cross-checking with medical records to catch patterns of injuries. It passed unanimously 2 months later, with Theo's name attached to protect other kids from falling through the same cracks. Back at the library, I kept running story time every Saturday, but everything felt different now. I made sure we always had plenty of snacks, and I'd casually mention that food was something every kid deserved every single day, not something you had to earn or win. When new kids showed up, I watched for loose clothes, thin arms, bruises in strange places, that weird pride about being hungry that Ava had shown. I put up posters about children's rights and made sure kids knew they could talk to me if any adult was hurting them. Sharon helped me create little cards kids could take home that listed warning signs of abuse on one side and help numbers on the other, disguised as bookmarks so parents wouldn't get suspicious. We started doing special programs about feelings and bodies, teaching kids that pain wasn't normal, and adults who hurt children were doing something wrong, not making them strong. Caroline sent me updates every few months about the girls' progress. After a year with their adoptive family, both girls were doing regular kid things like joining soccer teams and having sleepovers with friends. Ava had started helping at a local shelter, talking to other kids who'd been through bad stuff and showing them it could get better. She was in therapy twice a week and learning that strength meant asking for help when you needed it, not suffering alone in silence. Millie was catching up in the school, her reading improving now that she could concentrate without hunger pains, and she'd even performed in the school talent show doing a dance routine. Caroline said both girls still had bad days, nightmares and panic attacks, but the good days kept getting more common, and the bad days kept getting shorter. 2 years into her sentence, I heard through Murdoch that the mother had died in prison. The medical examiner found evidence of years of untreated injuries and malnutrition, suggesting she'd been another victim of the father's abuse long before the kids came along. Other inmates had apparently found out what she'd done to kids and made her life hell, but the official cause was complications from internal damage that had never properly healed. It reminded everyone that she'd been trapped in that house too, choosing between her own survival and protecting the children, though she'd made the wrong choice every single time. 3 years after that first story time, Caroline forwarded me an email from Millie's teacher about a creative writing contest she'd won at the school. Millie had written a story about 2 sisters who got saved by a brave librarian who noticed they were hungry and called for help. She'd changed all the names and details for privacy, but the teacher wanted Caroline to know how beautifully Millie had captured the feeling of being seen and saved by someone who cared enough to act. The teacher said Millie read it to the whole school at assembly and didn't cry once, standing tall and proud while she shared her story of survival. When Ava hit her teenage years, she started speaking at child welfare conferences about recognizing abuse. Caroline sent me a video of one talk where Ava stood in front of 200 social workers and described the Hunger Games, the charts on the fridge, how she'd been programmed to be proud of suffering. She told them to watch for kids who brag about not needing things, who show off their endurance of pain, who think abuse is normal because it's all they've known. At the end, she looked right at the camera and said, "A librarian saved her life by noticing something was wrong and refusing to ignore it," though she knew I'd say she saved herself by being brave enough to talk about the games that day. The library board approved Sharon's proposal for annual training for all youth program staff, using our case as the main teaching example. We brought in experts to teach about trauma responses, mandated reporting, and how to create safe spaces where kids felt comfortable disclosing abuse. We practiced how to ask gentle questions, how to document concerns, when to call CPS versus when to gather more information first. Other libraries across the state started requesting our training materials, and within 2 years it became part of standard orientation for anyone working with kids in public programs. 5 years after everything began, Caroline sent me one last photo that made me cry at my desk. It showed Ava and Millie in graduation caps and gowns, standing between their adoptive parents, holding their high school diplomas and grinning like regular teenagers. Both girls looked healthy and strong in the real way, not the twisted version their birth father had tried to create through starvation and pain. Caroline's note said Ava was heading to college to study social work, while Millie had gotten into art school, both of them determined to help other kids who'd been through darkness. Their adoptive parents had given them everything they'd needed to heal, therapy and patience and unconditional love, though Caroline said the girls had done the hard work of learning to accept that love and believe they deserved it. That photo still sits on my desk at the library, A reminder that one moment of paying attention can change everything, that speaking up when something feels wrong can be the difference between life and death for a child. 7 years after that first Saturday, Caroline forwarded me another email that made me grab tissues from my desk drawer. Ava had gotten her acceptance letter to the State University's social work program, along with a scholarship for survivors of childhood trauma. The email included a photo of her holding the letter, grinning next to Millie, who was waving her own acceptance to the local art college. Caroline's note mentioned that Ava had written about wanting to specialize in recognizing hidden abuse in her application essay, describing how one person noticing small signs had saved her and her sister from dying like Theo and the others. Millie's portfolio for art school included a series of paintings about hunger and healing that her teachers said were powerful enough to make viewers cry. Their adoptive parents drove them to campus visits where Ava asked detailed questions about internship programs at Child Protective Services, while Millie spent hours in the art therapy studios learning about using creativity to help traumatized kids process their experiences. I sent them both congratulations cards with library bookmarks tucked inside, remembering that scared little girl who once thought going 4 days without food made her strong. Every Saturday morning, I still unlock the library's children's section for story time, setting out juice boxes and crackers while watching each child who walks through the door. I notice things now that I might have missed before, like the boy whose sleeves never quite cover the marks on his wrists, or the girl who flinches when her dad raises his hand to wave goodbye. I keep CPS on speed dial and document anything concerning with photos on my phone, knowing that one call can mean everything. Last week, a new girl named Alice told me proudly that she only needs 3 hours of sleep because her stepmom is teaching her to be tough, and I felt that familiar cold feeling in my stomach as I reached for my phone.